So, of course, this is how all the Soviet artists in 1968 learnt about people like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, you know, who based all his work on comics and things. And my guy did a whole exhibition in the Garage Museum around Andy Warhol. This actually is part of a hammer and sickle that Andy Warhol painted. I think it was the one important loan, expensive loan that the Garage in Moscow got. And I'm holding Dimitri's catalogue, which has got the most funny name in English. I'm quite sure that in Russian it doesn't sound quite so silly. It's called If This Soup Can Could Speak. You know that Andy Warhol did Campbell's tomato soup cans ad infinitum to talk about commodity culture and so forth. But actually this long story of Russian-Soviet relations and modern art in Russia and things, and Mikhail Lifshitz and so forth, is all involved in this ridiculous title, If This Soup Can Could Speak. But I wish now I was still in touch, as I could be on email. Everything's gone a little bit pear-shaped in terms of communication.
Sarah, can I just...
You're saying we're getting a bit late.
No, I think I just wanted to say, I know it's awful, it's probably only me who can do it, because
you shut me up.
Because you won't kill me.
So,
is that there are people who do, you know, I would love to ask you questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to zap through some words. Okay, because I'm a feminist. Because we went to our great feminist school. So, just to say, amazing story here of this woman, Nadia Leger, I've just written about, copying Fernand Leger, whom she was in love with. And then espousing his work for her gravestone, which I think is amazing. These are very, very short, is all right. Françoise Gillot, I've just written a big essay for, and as you know, she's just died aged 101. And you can see that she's actually doing quite conventional, very pleasurable art, and I think she should be better known, and I've tried to book her back into a context where she spent 10 years in London, showed in the major things like the Leicester Galleries, the catalogues there. Evelyn Axel, beautiful Belgian artist using plexiglass, getting away from just painting. This work's going to be in the Frieze Masters in October. It belongs to me, actually. They're trying to make me sell it, but I won't. Nikki de Saint-Phal, shooting paintings. The great Nikki, whom I knew about much, much earlier on at the beginning of the Pompidou Centre, but the great Orlan, a very close friend of mine, who did all these weird facial operations. And then Sheila Hicks, you may... Well, I should think it would be very unlikely. Did any of you travel to the Hepworth to see her retrospective? So she's with Monique Lévi-Strauss. So I'm interested in these twinnings because Lévi-Strauss himself, the great anthropologist, wrote a preface about Sheila Hicks. Unsolicited preface. And it's these conjunctions of the thinkers and the artists that I actually did my book about. This is her textile work, and called Cristobal's Trapeze, which is dedicated to her son by her Venezuelan husband, very South American influence. But one of the people she never likes to talk about is her rival, Barbara Chase-Ribou, whose magnificent show at the Serpentine you might have seen, who actually got the idea of combining metal and textiles from Sheila Hicks. Let's not go there. Amazing exhibition in the Giacometti Museum in Paris of Barbara, before that idea was presumably marketed to the MoMA in New York. One of my big Polish adventures, I won't give you the trajectory of, Zofia Kulik, very much post-communism, as you can see, and shows you how something you can easily psychoanalyze if you want to. I won't go into detail. She is the star of the current Arles Photograph Festival. She came out of Poland. She never travelled specifically to be the star of the Arles Photograph Festival. Crazy guys I write about. Petr Pawlenski, who actually brought the fire of Maidan in Ukraine in 2013, staged a thing with Ukrainian flags and burning barriers in a church in St. Petersburg in 2013, before the Russian invasion of Crimea. Put this fire in front of Lubyanka, the door into the FBI offices in Moscow, before he was forced to emigrate. As you may know, he burned a bank on the site of the Bastille in France and is not quite so famous. But Jeremy Corbyn, somebody you all know very well, goes to his exhibitions in Islington, not in Islington, in South London, in a gallery called Apolitical, run by my students. Abdel Abdesamed, Je suis innocent, I'm innocent. I just ended with far. He did this little... pigeon with dynamite on, I've written. And in fact, he gave a wonderful, I haven't got many quotes in this because I wanted to talk really more about adventures. I've written an amazing, well, I mean, in an essay called Cry Havoc, because you can see this pigeon which is on the top of Peckham Car Park. If you haven't been to the top of Peckham Car Park, it's taken over by the Hannah Barry Gallery with amazing orchestral performances and things. And Richard Deacon, not Deacon, the other one, other Richard's Wiggles. And there's his little work, strangely enough called Bristow, after the hero in the Evening Standard. China Adventure. And last but not least, just to show you, to come back to Richard Long, because he's appeared 3 times in this. He was the person I didn't understand at all. He's the person who, in the beautiful exhibition you may have seen in the National Gallery about St. Francis of Assisi, is juxtaposed with Sienese painting, 1220, Portrait of St. Francis. Look at the halo. And Richard Long does text pieces, which I think is the greatest landscape poet in England, greatest English landscape poet. Obviously we're talking about, there's a difference between English and British, the greatest English landscape. This is his walk in honour of St. Francis of Assisi, which now I do understand, which is the most beautiful poem describing his walk. It combines time and form, 1 or 2 Italian words. He mostly uses the most beautiful, very Anglo-Saxon-based monosyllabic words in his word pieces. And so it's just to end with this, to say that actually I haven't come full circle. I've come full circle in my talk from not having understood anything in I won't say the year, my first trip to Venice Biennale, Richard Long's 682 stones. But there you see that it's all alive and well, and here in London, and for everybody. And so I hope you've understood that it's not art appreciation. And that it's a very exciting and international adventure, and it's extremely political, and one can be extremely committed, but there can be beautiful formal things as well as the stories behind the stories. So there we are. Thank you. To answer questions. I said 10:40. I'm afraid I did overrun 10 minutes. Yes.
I thought you were going to be completely unstoppable, but because I could see that there was a whole world still for you to talk about, and I think that your ability to draw us into those questions has just been quite phenomenal. I don't know how many questions. We've got a full house. He's going to have a lot of questions, so would you like to start over there?
And as I say, if you say the thingy was the thingy, I know what you're talking about. I'll go back to the image as well.
Hello, thank you very much. Fascinating talk. Seems to be the subtext of it is that art has moved from the aesthetic to the intellectual. And if I may say so, become a bit of a playground for academics like you. But what about the general public? Does this connect at all with them?
Well, don't you think this connects? Do you get it? I mean, I've been teaching conceptual art for 11 years, but I deliberately didn't put much in. Because, I mean, you can read this, and you can read Richard Long's journey. And when you say playground, could we just use a tennis rather than a football analogy? It's like watching Wimbledon and saying, you know, this is a multi-million-pound sport with people that is not accessible. I thought that, especially using many realistic images and indeed portraits. I showed you quite a few portraits, including, you can say that Abdel Abdesamed saying "Je suis innocent." His teacher at the Algerian School of Fine Art was murdered, which is not irrelevant to his art. You know, this image is as much a self-portrait as some of the more conventional painted ones, but it's not difficult to see that it's a man on fire. So I think that there's an amazing, well, I mean, you can explain to me how you feel, because when you say playground, I've used the word adventure, and I would say intellectual adventure, but reading anything, even Martin Amis, is an intellectual adventure. And intellectual adventures are the same as playing tennis as a physical adventure. Can you explain to me where you find something extremely incomprehensible? I mean, even if I showed you that funny light bulby thing with electricity in it and magnetism, that's what it is. You know, it's like saying, I don't want to sculpt, you know, white marble men. I want to do something more exciting with sculpture. So the thing is, it's really good if you could tell me what you find intractable or not appealing to the public. And that is one of the big questions for Tate, of course. And actually, I didn't say this in my lecture, but their labels are supposed to be intelligible by intelligent 13-year-olds. And some of my students have been fired for not writing simple enough labels. That's why that big car painting is never properly explained. Anyone else? I mean, I'm just asking if you found things. Of course, if it had been visually homogeneous and you were following the story of Cubism, you might have found it less something or less confusing.
I think that's one question.
Yeah. Hello?
Who is it?
Over there.
Sorry, can I make a point?
Mm.
I want to think of art as image thinking, not just as psychoanalysis, but there's a language of images that appeals to us.
Of course, yeah.
And, you know, in that sense, I prefer Dostoevsky to Jane Austen. But in that sense, you know, there was an exhibition at Barbican of art after the 1914-18 war, and it was unbearable.
Sorry, do you mean the post-war exhibition that was after 45?
Well, it was a long time ago. I can only remember it's etched in my memory. It was about the after effects of the First World War.
Yes.
It was amazingly powerful.
Yeah.
And you could understand a flight into the abstract because the emotions are unbearable. So in that sense, I don't think it's playing with just a game. I think people need to have a voice. And when you were showing
Sorry, I can't see. Where are you?
here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And in that thing, you know, I was thinking, you showed me the planks over the mud.
Yes.
I was thinking of, I once worked with somebody who's immensely creative and still is.
Mm.
And I once said to her, not putting planks over the shit, you need me to wade through the shit with you. In that sense, you're looking at appalling childhood experience, and people need to have a voice. In that sense, we've got Francis Bacon. So the art will reflect personal histories and social ones. You know, on that level, and that a flight into the abstract can be a retreat. You know, there is the art world of La Haine in Paris, which is
Of course, of course, of course. Well, I mean, firstly, you said that after the First World War, people were turning to abstraction, and in fact, it's completely the other way around. Before the First,
partially.
well, yes, it depends which decade you're talking about. But immediately before the First World War, we had our wonderful vorticist movement, which was a response to the futurists, with fantastic abstract works like David Bomber. And it was precisely because of the horrors of the First World War and Wyndham Lewis, and it was precisely because of that that people went back to realism. And it was precisely because, I mean, if you, of course I brought in the Holocaust, because I'm the only person at the Courtauld who teaches anything about it. Because of those things, people thought that abstract art was not capable of responding to atrocity. But on the other hand, I didn't really give you a lecture about the abstract artists at the time, but they had got this idea of the evolution of art towards abstraction and did not want to go, as they conceived it, backwards into representation. The political arguments were very strong. And then you did actually talk about trauma and things. And of course, there wasn't time. I mean, this is also about communist trauma and feminism in a very complex way. Trauma is, of course, something very, very interesting and important, and how it works out and through things. I don't really teach Bacon, but I'm very interested in Bacon. He's had a huge influence in France, and he's very well loved there. And so I can't tell you to what extent the argument, I mean, I just vaguely sketched it, the argument between figuration and abstraction was a huge Cold War argument, with the USSR saying socialist realism is the only way versus evil American abstraction and things. It was a really, really big debate. And so obviously the essence of that debate, like how do you fit these two things together? How could they coexist? Which one is morally preferable was precisely what people were divided into two camps about in the period that interests me.
Yes, and isn't that really the core of your presentation? And I think that was what's so amazingly interesting, is how these different views bounce off each other.
And of course, the other thing is that if you do the Thames and Hudson art today, you don't have any of these problems of different tendencies coexisting. You have a nice, clean story. And actually, I don't know, well, I mean, Alfred Barr, the great curator at MoMA, did a diagram of tendencies with little bits of, red arrows for Japanese art and what he called Negro, things coming in and out. And it ends up with geometric art and non-geometric art at the end. In 1936, at the height of American regionalism, because he wanted a cleaned up story. And it's too difficult, and of course the story in Europe was not that cleaned up story. And people like being taught, if teaching is of the essence, or like reading about cleaned up stories. And unbeknownst to me, I was plunged into the dirtiest of stories. And so it was, I just didn't understand what was going on. It took me years to understand not only the subject matter I was dealing with, but retrospectively, the period when I was dealing with the 1940s and 50s, what was happening, when I was there in the 80s and 90s. So I suppose I like this messiness. Because if you want to use analogies, it's much more Dostoevskian to be in a really messy polyphonic situation than in a nice clean story.
Thank you very much.
There's a question over there, actually. Oh, there's one here, sorry, and two.
One more question, because we're running very late, yes.
Oh, I asked if there was a cut-off time.
Yes, there is.
But apparently we can have an informal
Yes, but
conversation.
I've got one other
Yeah.
This will just be a quickie. At the end of, towards the end of the 19th century, the Impressionists, of course, burst on the scene, and one of the critics said that they were throwing paint into the face of the general public, or the viewing public.
Yes.
And they were laughed at.
Yeah.
Now, the art that you showed us, we now find as difficult as the Impressionists were found at that time. Therefore, I would suggest the art that you showed us needs a bit more time.
Well, I know, was I could have given a monographical one, but do you think that's difficult? It's just like
that kind of thing was started in the days of Kandinsky and so on. So it's been going on for a long time. I saw the picture of Paul Klee. So yes, of course it's approachable. But some of the things that you have shown us, I think, need a little bit more time.
So which ones did you type?
We should
Can I suggest that we pause this event at the moment? I've got one or two announcements to make.
Sorry, everybody.
I've got one or two.